Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining this session in which we're going to present some of the key findings from the past 4 years of the GCRF project in Myanmar. Next slide. My name is Patrick Meehan and I'm based at SOAS in the Department of Development Studies, and I've been working on the GCRF project since its inception at the end of 2017. For most of this session, I'm going to be handing over to colleagues in the Myanmar research team to present some of our key research findings. But before I do that, I want to provide a brief overview of all the work that we've done over the past 4 years in the Myanmar team, which is more than we have scope to present on in the 1.5 hours that we have today. We've also left time at the end of this session for Q&A, so if you have questions as you're listening into the presentations, please do write them in the chat box as we go. I should also add that we're currently trying to present this session from multiple locations, including Machina, Taunggyi, Chiang Mai, and the UK. So do bear with us if there are any technical glitches. Next slide, please. I think we're just waiting for the tech team to get onto the slide sharing. Okay, great. And the next one as well, please. Yeah, and one more. Yeah, brilliant. So our work in Myanmar has focused on SHAN state and Kachin state, which are the major drug producing regions in the country. We focus not only of issues relating to drug production, but also issues around drug use and drug related harms and the responses that these have evoked. And we've also focused on multiple types of drugs, including opium, heroin, and also methamphetamines. And the research team within the GCRF project that has been working on Myanmar has comprised of myself, Dr. Mandy Sadan, a research team at Kachinland Research Centre, which is based in Machina in Kachin State, which is led by Dan Seng, and a team of researchers at SHAN Herald Agency for News, led by Aung, which are based, or they were based in Taunggyi and also in Chiang Mai. Next slide, please. So the aim of our research over the past 4 years has been to try to develop a wider research agenda on drug issues in Myanmar. There's been a lot of excellent work on drugs in Myanmar, although its predominant focus has largely been on issues related to drug production and trafficking, and also on the relationship between the drug trade and issues of armed conflict. And while these have also been key aspects of our own research on this project, we've also tried to expand our research in a number of ways. In particular, we've become interested in how drugs have become embedded in systems of borderland rule that emerged under the ceasefires in the country's borderlands dating back to the late 1980s, and that the forms of stability and order that emerged around those ceasefires, rather than just issues of armed conflict. And we've also focused a lot on how drugs have become embedded in processes of economic development in the country's borderlands. And we've also focused a lot on issues around drug use and the specific challenges and tensions that arise in communities where opium cultivation remains vital to the livelihoods of many poor households, but where rising levels of drug use and drug-related harms have also resulted in new forms of vulnerability and poverty. Next slide, please. From the outset, we were aware that conducting research on drug issues remained a highly sensitive issue in Myanmar, and over the past 4 years, the project has faced many challenges. The scope to do this research with partner organisations based within Myanmar was possible due to the political reforms that have been implemented in Myanmar since 2010 with the general election. SHAN, for example, had gained official registration to set up an office in Taunggyi in SHAN state, having previously been based in northern Thailand for many decades. And KRC was established in 2015 with the aim of becoming a leading social science research centre. However, Myanmar's so-called transition since 2010 also coincided with worsening violence across many of the areas that we were working on and the breakdown of previous ceasefires. And by the time we started fieldwork on this project in 2018, it was clear that the national peace process had entered a period of deadlock and crisis. It therefore remained very unclear how much leeway there was to conduct research on drug issues, and with the priority always being to ensure that research was conducted in a way that did not pose undue risks to the research teams or those that they spoke with. I think it's also important to emphasize that drugs are also a highly emotive and sensitive issue for communities as well as political authorities. And this is especially in light of the enduring stigma that surrounds drug use and drug harms and rising levels of drug use in recent decades. And this has posed particular challenges for conducting research on drug issues amongst partner organisations who have conducted this work in the communities where they live and work themselves. And it goes almost without saying, of course, that the impact of COVID-19 and the February the 1st military coup has also had a profound impact on our work in many ways. We'd already conducted 2 rounds of field work before COVID-19, which provided a strong platform for a lot of the work that we're going to present today, although some of the follow-up research that we planned in the second half of the project became extremely difficult in light of the changed pandemic context and then the changed political context. And it's a huge testament to both KRC and SHAN that we've been able to continue to develop these partnerships over the last 2 years amidst this kind of political strife, and to continue to conduct extensive local engagement work on drug issues. And I think as our project comes to an end, it's clear that many of the dynamics that have long driven drug production and drug use in Kachin State and Shan State are all likely to worsen over the coming years in the aftermath of the coup and the enduring political crisis that has ensued. Next slide, please. Before I hand over to my colleagues in the Myanmar team to present some of our key findings, I want to briefly outline the research we undertook and the core themes that have underpinned our work over the past 4 years. So our research was initially planned as 3 rounds of fieldwork. The first round in 2018 was designed as a broad scoping study and aimed to cover a lot of issues and cover a wide geographical area. In fact, we conducted research in the vast majority of townships across Kachin State and Shan State, with the idea that this would hopefully provide a number of core themes that would emerge out of that work, which would then provide the basis for more sustained and detailed follow-up fieldwork in years 2 and 3. A lot of the first year was also spent on building relations with local authorities and getting a clearer sense of what was actually safe and feasible to do in terms of research and methodologies. Next slide, please. So in terms of the research that we've done, it's largely been built around 4 key research themes. Next slide. So the first of these themes was to try to unpick and understand better the relationship between drugs and processes of development in Myanmar's borderlands. Kachin State and Shan State have experienced rapid economic change since the late 1980s, and the past 3 decades have seen a vast expansion in resource extraction, especially logging and mining, infrastructure that emerged around these processes, and increased border trade and the growth of various border boom towns. And this in many ways reflected a broader trend across Southeast Asia following the end of the Cold War, in which regional economic integration was viewed as a key development strategy. And borderlands were often increasingly reimagined as resource-rich, unexploited areas that could be targeted for large-scale development, cross-border trade, and economic integration. And our research has been particularly interested in understanding how drugs have become a part of that development story and how it's become embedded in these wider processes of borderland development. And in doing so, we've been particularly keen to try and challenge the idea that drugs only flourish in areas that are economically marginalized or peripheral to global economies, and to show how drug issues in these areas are part of a much bigger story around how these areas have been integrated into national and global economies. Next slide. Next slide, yeah, that's great. So the second key theme in our work is also looking at, sorry, just go back one, of how drugs have become embedded in systems of borderland rule. Then again, a lot of our focus has been on the ceasefire period since the late 1980s, when the Myanmar military agreed a whole array of ceasefires with various armed organisations based across Kachin state and SHAN state. And it became very clear from the work that we were doing in year one that time and again, people associated worsening drug issues with the ceasefire period and with systems of authority that had begun to emerge in areas that were no longer seeing outright armed conflict, but that continued to see severe and worsening drug issues. And this was often linked with a paradox that became very clear around the ceasefires, that the very same ceasefire arrangements that had reduced levels of outright violent conflict and had created a degree of stability had also exposed borderland populations to a whole array of new destabilizing and violent issues around militarization, resource extraction, and the expansion of a whole array of army-backed militias. And these militias, who have also become key players in the drug trade, have been a large focus of our work in order to understand this relationship between drugs and systems of rule. Next slide, please. So the third core theme that has shaped our work has also been understanding the impacts of increasing drug use. And I think Myanmar has often been seen within drug issues as primarily a drug producing country, as a supplier of opium and increasingly methamphetamines to wider drug consumption markets elsewhere. But rising levels of drug use have also become a key issue across SHAN state and Kachin state. And a lot of our work has been understanding the pathways into drug use and understanding the harms that have been generated, not only from drug use, but also some of the responses to drugs, whether that's forms of stigma or very harsh prison sentences by authorities. And a particular aspect of this work has been understanding youth pathways into drugs and the impacts that drug harms have had on young people. Next slide, please. And then the final core theme that has shaped our work has also been the responses to drug use. And here we focus much less on international responses or responses by national government, and much more on the kinds of localized responses that have emerged within borderland regions across Kachin state and SHAN state. The kinds of societal responses that have emerged to what is perceived as a severe, almost existential threat posed by rising drug issues, and trying to understand how those responses have been mobilized and the kind of impacts that these responses have had. And we've produced an awful lot of published findings around these core themes, if we move on to the next couple of slides. And we also have a number of outputs still in the pipeline. So this has ranged from an array of journal articles, but also key parts of the main flagship reports for the GCRF project, the two Voices from the Borderlands reports. If you move on to next slide, please. And as you can see here, we've also produced two comics in English, but also in Burmese, Jingpo and Shan, that tell the story of issues around drugs and youth that have also become an important part of some of the local engagement work that we've been doing. Next slide. Yeah, these are some of our other reports, which have also been in multiple languages. And next slide as well, please. So what I'm going to do now is we're now going to move into a set of more detailed presentations which dig into some of the core issues within the research that we've been doing. And we frame this around three key presentations. So the first one by Dan Seng, who I'm about to pass over in a moment, at Kachinland Research Centre, is focused on issues of brokered rule and focuses on the dynamics around drugs and militias in northern SHAN state. Once Dan Seng has finished, I'm then going to pass over to the SHAN team, to Sayong La and Sai Kampu, who are focusing on issues around drugs and youth, and looking at pathways into drug-related harms amongst young people. And then the third presentation by Mandy Sadan is focusing on the SHAN social movement, which emerged in Kachin state in response to the drugs crisis in that region. So I will now pass over to Dan Seng Long, who will speak for about 15 minutes on this first presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Patrick, for your kind introduction. And I will just briefly talk about how militias navigate in the larger context of borderland, state building, and the illicit economy. Next slide, please. Talking about Northern Shan State as a political space, it is highly contested frontier space, and politically as well as militarily, it is a highly contested area. It is a place where resource frontiers, key trade routes, and strategic sensitive national borders intersect and intermingle. And looking at its history, I think we see a complex history of insurrection, weak central government control, well-established systems of non-state public authority, and service provision, and ethnic and linguistic diversity. It is a very diverse ethnically as well as culturally. It is also a zone of unpredictability, and friction occurred frequently, and which symbolizes both the opportunities and constraints for states and markets to operate in the area. This place, though it is conflict-affected areas, it is located in the epicenter of conflict. It is also key to Myanmar's national economy because it is bordering with China, the biggest market. And in this area, I think there are also many powerful militias operate in Northern Shan State. Next slide, please. And this is the map of Northern Shan State. And you see different zones, different places. Formerly, it was under the control of Burma Communist Party, and later its splinter groups control these areas. And you also the state expansion into that area, and at the same time, it's also converge with the growth of China on the other side. Next slide, please. Yes, so talking about the brokerage role that the militias group play in Northern Shan State, especially the army-backed, militias group. So I think the militias group not just play the role of brokerage for the political and military purpose. They also play the role of brokerage across language, cultural, and ethnic divides. All the militias leaders in Northern Shan State are also drawn from non-Burma ethnic nationalities. And also the individuals or organizations that are able to broker across these divides are valued as network specialists because of their ability to get things done. I think they are quite good at that. And the other important aspect of the brokerage role is the use of violence. Violence has been used as a leverage for the militias group to carve out their political space in Arunachal state between Myanmar military and the many other ethnic armed groups operating in the area. And to carry out certain brokerage roles, I think the role is not really static. It's keep changing. It's highly dynamic as well. And the other role that they play is the cross-border business brokerage and connecting Chinese and Burmese investors. And the militias also seek to maintain autonomy and pursue their own political and economic interests. They also have to manage competing pressures and demands from the community they are embedded in. Next slide, please. So this is the picture showing that the Gongkha militias group, one of the major militias group, the Tamdo seized the drugs from the Gongkha militias in 2018. That seizure included 30 million meth pills, 1.75 tons of crystal meth, and 500 kilograms of heroin. Approximately, it's valued more than 10 million USD. Next slide, please. And that's the role of the militias we talked about in the previous slide. And now we talk about how the Myanmar military make use of the militias group in their broader game of politics in the area. I think often the militias leaders are go off that and monitored and controlled by the Myanmar Tamdos. So the drugs really play a crucial role in that political game of the Tamado. And so the Tamado, I think, also rely not just on the formal relation with the militias group. They also heavily rely on the informal, relations and coalition buildings with the militias group, giving them the informal permission to operate drug businesses as a way to encourage militias to ally with the Myanmar military, giving the business concessions, allowing them to pass through the Tamada check boats and things like that. And on the other hand, the drugs also play as a crucial, commodity for the Tamado to allure the militias. At the same time, illicit drug trade also gives the Tamado a leverage to counter and check the militias, if they shy away from the Tamado's interests. So often they use the threats of punishment and arrest under the name of illicit drug trade. So many examples I think we can give. The Gongkha militias groups, Gongkha's militia groups incident in 2018 is a good example. And in the past experience, you also have Mongol Defense Army, which is also a Tamado-backed militia group. And also some ethnic armed groups as well have the same pressures, the same experience they encounter. Yes, next slide, please. So it is therefore not a straightforward and a linear, game that the militias also have to play in the region. So it is always always a struggle for them to maintain power and autonomy, and also they also need to strike a balance between the illicit drug trade they are involved in, at the same time to maintain their brokerage role for their survival in the area. And since the northern SHAN state is not a research-rich area, I think drug is one of the commodity which is quite a very serious temptation for the militias group to resist, because they have to rely heavily on the revenue from the illicit drug trade in order to purchase weapons, retain troops, and to become powerful enough to resist the Tamil's pressure. They also need to maintain, patronage role in order to maintain their relevance in the area. So, which includes means of informal gifts, payments. That's also include to the local military officer and the commander, the Tamil's commander in the area. And it is always a struggle for them to construct and legitimize their rule, One of the obvious thing they do is they use to finance, the cultural events, the community services, and development activities in the area in order to generate the legitimacy that they need. Because, for instance, the Conquer's militias groups, they always need to maintain that and generate that necessary legitimacy, because otherwise, I think the ethnic armed organization like KIA can easily take up, their role and fill in the leadership and the void. Next slide, please. So, as we mentioned earlier, I think here in this short presentation, I think I want to go through a case study about Gongkha militias group, the rise and fall of the Gongkha militias group. I think as all the militias, the stories of militias groups in northern SHAN states, I think it all starts with a strong man. In the Gongkha's case, I think Matuno is a very complex figure and a strong leader. Formerly, he served in the KIA 4th Brigade, but defected in 1990 when the tension between the KIA and Tamil reached to its zenith, and formed the Kachin Defense Army, which is called KDA, and controlled territory across Gutkai and Lashu township, and control strategic areas west to the Salmon River, linking to the Wa and Kokang territories. And they have been delegated responsibilities for day-to-day governance under Northeastern Regional Command based in Lashu. And they also established a stronger presence, school, healthcare, and administrative offices in Gongkha town. Even KDA built pagodas, even though the majority of the 99% of the Gongkha denizens are Christian, in order to maintain good relationship with the Northeastern Regional Command. But KDA also retained close links with KIA, pursued its own activities. They constructed roads, schools, chargers, Kachin language and church-based curriculum. They funded this kind of national agenda. Built one of the largest Manao festival grounds and financed the Kachin Literature Association, hosted events even when not possible as well. The Kongkha militia's brokerage role was possible because they operated under the conditions of the KIA ceasefire. But this was always an exposed position and ephemeral at time. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes. So the four. So a renewed conflict started in northern SHAN with Gokang in 2009, and then 17 years long ceasefire agreement between the Damodar and KIA broke down in 2011. The story of Kongkha's militia's downfall starts from there, and Myanmar army determined to strengthen control over northern SHAN state. Greater army pressure, KDA renamed Kongkha militias in 2009. And also pressures piling up on Kongkha militias from all sides as conflict worsened. They increased involvement in the drug trade after 2008, which offered a way to generate more revenue quickly to strengthen capacity to resist external pressures. Kongkha militias brokerage across conflict fault lines seen as a strategic weakness by the Myanmar army. Often they think Kongkha is no longer reliable ally. Drug raids on Kongkha areas in March 2020, key leaders arrested, and 1,000 plus weapons and $200 million plus drugs seized from the Kongkha. And even though the militias was not dismantled entirely, it's actually the seizure actually paralyzed the Kongkha militias group. Sadan admin and business activities still continue. It may serve as useful function again in the future from the perspective of the Damodar. Next slide, please. So this is the coalition that I interviewed with senior Kongkha militias in 2019. It's quite telling. What he said was how they have to strike a balance between the conflict and between the Damodar. So what he said was, owing to the armed conflict in northern SHAN, we had to maintain a regular communication channel with the KIA. Since major ethnic armed groups in northern SHAN, some way or the other have to procure arms and ammunition from the UWSA, which is the WA armed group, strategically located, control the eastern Salween River territories bordering with China. And they all have to pass through our control area on the western bank of Salween River. The vast territory is on the eastern bank. We cannot say no to them. So that's the beginning of, a friction between the Kongkha's militias group and the Damodar. Next slide, please. So the drugs seizure, a photo. Next slide, please. So conclusions, I think, in this short, from this short presentation, I think what can we conclude about? I think the role of the brokerage the militias group play in Northern Shan State. The role of brokerage creates contingent, contradictory, and often unintended outcomes. Gongka case is a good example. And pervasive militarization. Under that condition, I think coercive power is essential to what makes a broker useful in the eyes of the Myanmar state. These empowering non-militarized forms of negotiation and brokerage. The existence of military groups also gives us a sense of and the real picture of fragmentation of political authority in the Northern Shan State. In order to, from the state perspective, in order to reinvigorate the systems, the state systems, I think they have to rely on this militias rule led by strong men. And the existence of militias groups and the relevance of brokerage in that area in order to strengthen, the state rules. I think the consequences of that is the outcomes of that is the proliferation of drug production and drug harms. Therefore, I think drug and violence, as we can conclude, are not simply a legacy of armed conflict, state breakdown, and economic marginalization. They are now deeply embedded in the DNA of the modern Myanmar state. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dan Seng, for that. It was a really comprehensive overview. We're not going to break for Q&A between each of the presentations, but there will be some time at the end. We've had quite a few technical issues with the SHAN team. With Saipu Murng, who is based in Town G, has had real issues with the connection, as has Sayong La. So what we're going to do is Sayong La is speaking through line into my laptop. So we'll just hope this goes okay. So I'm going to pass over to you now, Sayong, and yeah, ready for your presentation.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mandy.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, we're trying to figure out with this technical problem. So I think finally I got to speak into this conference. Hello again. My name is Sayong La. And I'm going to present you our second themes that we are focusing on the drugs and youth. We are looking in this, what are the factors that shape, the way in which young people they encounter with the drugs-related harm, in Shan State. And our findings, reflect wider research on the socio-economic challenges facing these ordinary people in Shan State. That is how decades of military-rule, economic underdevelopment, and grinding poverty have created, a risk environment to this community, especially among young people. Also, these vulnerabilities are especially acute for non-Burma ethnic nationality who have faced systematic marginalization at the hands of Burma nationalist ideology people. For example, the ethnic discrimination has constrained the economic opportunity for many of the non-Burma populations. And also, while state, the state already have invested solitary in, attempting to constrain, the spread of drugs and also like the drug harms within this community. It has been, since 30 decades, we have seen, the elites and wealthiers also, have enjoyed their living standards. However, the majority of the rural families, they continue to live their life in the environment that is, poverty and also like inequality. So like their main incomes come from, seasonal farming, such as from the rice, eggs, tea, and etc. However, they have to pay, tax to different groups. For example, the militia groups, the anti-armed organizations, or even the, the Myanmar military. Therefore, they have to work hard, in order to earn more income to support their families, around, for their children educations or for the healthcare, and also like for the daily use. And because of these young people or these people in this area, they work in the agriculture, and when they work in the field, they use drugs. They believe that if they use drugs, it helps them to be energetic and also enable them to work longer hours. That's why how these young people especially came into contact with the drugs. And also rigid drug widespread and also very therefore people in this region trying to cope with their economic hardship by selling small amount of drugs, and many of them especially the young people become small scale dealers, and this daily practice is become like something that is less abnormal, and is now become like very normal to this community. So with this kind of tactics, it leads the drugs into a host of everyday setting. For example, in the tea shops, you see in the game shops or school or university campus, or even like in other kind of setting like workplace. So this is how the young people came into contact with the drugs. Next slide, please. And also, the young people came into contact with the drugs because of like the unemployment. As you see, like the codes, even though they finished the university, these young people they finished the university, it's still very difficult for them, to find a job. So most of them, they came, from the very rural area. If you see like the pictures up below, that is where the young people lives. And when they come into urban area, to finish their education in the big city, they don't want to go back home, because if they go back home, they will face with the pressure, by the society, in their community. That is, if you cannot find a job, they see you as a failure, or therefore, like the picture above it shows like how bad the drug situation among the young people. They even inject, the drug into, use the syringe, inject the drug into like into their, blood like that, so that they can get high. Next slide, please. And also, the structural vulnerability of the institutional practice also like play a very important role in shaping young people pathway into drug harm. This is because the weak rules and regulations in these borderland regions. The law in this area is like is a side of negotiation. Drug dealers, mainly they link with the very powerful groups such as the militia groups, or even any armed groups. These drug dealers, are able to use their connection, and to claim protections, or even to leverage preferential treatment. With the local authority. Actually, this picture is one of the main, checkpoints. This area is also like it's a joy kind of combined with different kind of authority from like the custom or police and soldiers, and at this checkpoint they will check every single vehicle that passed. But if you can show or can prove that you are linked, you have a connection with any organization, any powerful groups, then you can get passed from this checkpoint. And it's we can say like it came out very clearly from our few interviews that because of the widespread of drug use, harsh impression sentences, and even like and also like because of the low payment of the public service, this shape the way in which the everyday practice of these local authorities, especially the police, they shape the way in which young people came into contact with the drugs. And also like these authorities, these local authorities, like police, they also like because of like it's a very big rule and regulations, they saw the opportunity to generate their revenues through different form of a strategy. For example, they can get it through bribery, extortions, or they even operating protection rackets. And according to our few research, few interviews, some of the police eventually directly involved in the drug business. Next slide, please. This is one of the quotes from a CSO worker in Changji. This quote really reflect the reality of everyday practice by the local police in SHAN state, which is the capital city of SHAN state. And also like this city are fully controlled by the central government. However, like all these kind of practices are still like in place, and even during the democratic transitions. Because we interviewed this in 2019, and this is the reality that is happening in the area that is fully controlled by the state government. Next slide, please. And this is another dimension, of the how the young people came in contact with the drugs harm. Because of like their youth culture and also like their gender dimension. Actually, young men, grow up in the context where the opportunity to fulfill, kind of like their ideas, notion that if the young men, they will be, they will have like the freedom, exploration, or experimentations. They can try things. However, there are this kind of notions are limited to them, and they also, most of the young people in this area, because of like their parents have to work hard to cope with the economic hardship, they often, oversight by their parents, and therefore, there's because of this situation, it leads the young people. To have a lot of time, and also like wish that they can engage and to try new things as because of like the young people, the youth culture. They want to try new things, which of that is, to try to, to use drug, to drink alcohol, and to use drug with their, with their peers. So they interact with their peers, and also like they sometimes, during if they interact with their peers, in SHAN society, in order for you, to establish the social bond, or so you try things, and often they'll ask, they will kind of challenge you. Being a man, you must try everything. That is a very famous kind of saying among the SHAN people, the SHAN men especially. However, for the women, it is unacceptable in the SHAN society that a woman that who drink or smoke or take the drugs are seen as the bad people. As you see, like from the court, for men, they even talk about what they had done. They see it as a lesson learned. For women, they did not talk or didn't want to talk about their past. They felt ashamed of their past. So it is for the woman, it is kind of it's led them to live in a very kind of vulnerability. So when they face when they are addicted with the drugs, they don't seek help from their families or with the treatment services. They choose to isolate themselves because of this, like I said, this stigmatization that surrounded them. Therefore, this is a really kind of worsening harm to young women who use drugs. Yes. So for next slide, please. Can you?
Okay. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you clear, Murng. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to continue to present from Aung. I would like to draw your attention to look at the Myanmar map. The Myanmar map is quite colorful. The colorful dot is representing the ethnic armed group or the militia group. But this here are the ethnic armed group that are active in Myanmar. But the majors of the ethnic armed group are active in Shan State. As you know that Myanmar is the second largest of the European producer after Afghanistan. But over 90% are from Shan State. And if we look at in Myanmar, although there are many armed groups, but the dominance of the drug trade or drug economy are the Myanmar army. However, the Myanmar army is not, the drug issues or to solve the problem. The drug issue is not their priorities. And if we look at in Myanmar, because of I think the former colonized countries, and the drug policy in Myanmar is out there, and so that it has been using the harsh approach of punishment to drug offenses. And also the central government, because of the ethnic issues, and as a drug response or is not the priority, so that the central government is not effective to provide the treatment to drug addicts in ethnic states. And so that when the drug issues and it's big problems in ethnic state. But the responses, when the drug user or the family cannot rely on the central government. So many times the communities and also the drug user, they have to find on their own solutions. because of the Myanmar, is the social securities and also the welfare is not in place in developing country. Next slide, please. And so that the responses and migration is one of the solutions. Many parents choose to send their son and daughter to big cities so that is less more vulnerabilities situation in their village and communities, and also they choose to send their son and daughter to neighboring countries so that especially the Thailand and China, because their government is really serious crack down on drug issues, but Myanmar is quite but the government is not not in their priorities. And so in Myanmar, the drug is so widespread and really to access. And if in Myanmar, if you would like to buy the vegetable, and you can go only in the morning and daytime, but the drug is accessed in 24 hours. And as you in nowadays, people can access to mobile phone, internet, and so they can order every time and everywhere. And also when the young people become to drug addict, and some they have the difficult in financial, so that they become small scale drug dealers, so that they can using drug and also the way of earning money. Next slide, please. Okay, the other solution made by the communities and the drug users, that they are sending their son and daughters to any armed group, because they cannot rely on the state sponsor or the state services, because the state service is not effective. Yeah, and also it's very high cost. If you go to the hospital and see the doctors, and they have to spend lots of money, and also they could be risked to arrest or put in jails because of the drug offenses are still in not as the other policy, or it should be as the policy should treat the drug user as a patient, but the Myanmar is not that. And so when the community or the parents or the drug users have no choice but to send to the drug or any armed group treatment centers, when they end up at any armed group treatment center, they have to go through the military-based mechanism that they have to go and parade and practice and so on. That they have to go to a cold turkey, and it is quite more in violence. They have to if they don't listen to the officer, they could be beaten by the officers. That could really impact on their physical and also the mental. Next slide, please. And as you can see the pictures, these young men are not forced recruited, but are volunteers joining the any armed group because they are drug users. And they have to go through of the treatment. Actually, the parents or the drug user know that the EEO treatment is not the best solution, but they have no choice. They cannot rely on the government's services. But however, the last choice is a kind of the best among the worst choice that they're sending to any armed group for the treatment. And as you can see the pictures, after the joining the any armed group for treatment, is kind of the parents, they get their son back, a kind of the new life for the young people. Before they joining the any armed group, they look skinny and pale because of using drug. And after they joining the training, they look healthy and strong and a kind of new person and new life. So that at the below pictures, a mother seeing their son as a kind of a new person and a kind of happy and sad at the same time. And so any armed group also because of in Burma is not treatment is not the proper and not in place. So the young men, after they joining the ethnic treatment, they return to the communities. But some of them they go back to drug. But any armed group after they finding out, they go and arrest them and coming back to join the treatment again. But they don't see that it's kind of the process of the drug addict or drug user have to deal with the drug the old habit. This is kind of the problems, and so this is the drug situation in Shan State, and I would like to pass to next presenter. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sarang La and Sai Kampu. I'm now going to pass over to Mandy for the last of our 3 presentations. Thank you, Mandy.
Great, thank you. And thank you everybody for joining us today. And thank you for your interest in what we've been doing. I'll try and keep my comments quite quick because I can see that there's already a couple of really important questions in the chat. And actually, Stephen, although I'm not attempting to answer your question, I think that what I'm going to talk about does speak to it very much and the consequences of not dealing with this issue. So I'm going to talk very briefly about some research that we've been doing in the Kachin state relating to a social movement called Pachasan. And I'm sure that many of you on the call will be very familiar. Could you go back to the previous slide, please? Thank you. You'll be very familiar with what Pachasan is, but I think we need to explain why we attached importance to this particular study. And one reason is that it also highlights the very interdisciplinary nature of what we're doing as well. So this research was partly driven by political economy, but also anthropological and cultural analysis too. So for those of you who may not be familiar, Pachasan was a social movement that emerged in the Kachin region broadly in about 2014, although it had its origins before that. And it was a local response to experiences of drug supply and use within local communities. And this has been a very significant part of our Myanmar research. And as Jonathan and Jenny referenced earlier, one reason why we attached such importance to it was because we're really taking seriously the remit that we had from the project to engage local voices. And to try and bring those forward in all of their complexity and the challenge that they create for all of us as well, and not to try and water that down or pretend that that complexity wasn't important in the overarching problem that we're trying to examine. So a lot of the representations of the movement in the national and international media has tend to focus on the methods that Pachasan has used for meting out very harsh punishments, especially to those who've been identified as being involved in drug supply. Excuse me. So this has included the destruction of opium crops, for example, which has impacted local farmers significantly, and often considerable violence has been used. They've also forcibly restrained people who use drugs and insisted that many of them went through drug withdrawal with minimal or no medical support. So the tactics sometimes involved a lot of violence, as I said, and this often meant to outside view there was a denial of the rule of law within Pachasan activities and that they contravened human rights, especially of people who use drugs. Now, in spending so much time looking at this, we weren't setting out at all to deny any of the reality of this, and we also didn't want to be seen as apologists for the movement. But we did feel that there was much more that needed to be said and understood about it. There are, as we're all aware, very significant knowledge inequalities permeating the drugs policy discourse. Yet developing policies and solutions that have any chance of success because they can be sustained and supported in local environments really require that we have a well-rounded understanding of the concerns and contexts and variety of perspectives of all of the stakeholders involved in community outcomes, and not just with those with whom we're in agreement or feel ideologically at ease. We were also very aware that a lot of what had been missing in the conversation about this movement was the fact that it emerged originally from the self-organising drive of women in the region, and you can see them, a group of women gathered here on this slide. So many of the women who first organised Pachasan were also female heads of household who were and are doing a great deal of the social, cultural, economic, and also the emotional work required to support families and communities. Now, they felt that they were being very adversely affected by the prevalence of relatively cheap illicit drugs. And as you said, Stephen, exactly the problems about failing to deal with this issue. So this included opium, which obviously had a traditional place in many communities, but it was also focused increasingly on heroin and synthetic stimulants and narcotics. So a perception that things were not as normal, they were becoming worse and they were changing. Now, women in this region have been very much excluded from participation in the peace process. And so we also felt that by exploring this movement, it was a very important way to bring in voices that were quite literally crying out to be heard. But this was not ostensibly a political movement. There was no clear agenda beyond remediating a specific sense of local crisis around drugs. But at its heart, what they were demanding related to the experience of the failure to deliver political settlement in the region. So this is, again, what motivated us to spend considerable time looking in detail beyond the representations that have predominated to date. So could you please go to the next slide now? Thank you. Yeah, so we produced 3 articles related to this, and for those of you who may be interested and haven't looked at them, I'll just point you towards them. So the 3 articles were part of a special edition, as I'm sure many of you are aware, which includes a lot of very interesting research from across the project and from all 3 countries, and then the multi-partner organisations as well. So we tried to give a deeper and broader picture of why we feel we need to take this movement seriously if we want to understand the impact of drug economies, especially on communities that have historically been primarily seen as drug producing rather than drug consuming. And as Jenny said in her keynote, that there's been a changed experience over time. So in the first article, we tried to give a very broad political overview of the reasons why the political settlement in the region has contributed to this emerging picture of Kachin space as being significantly affected by drug consumption, as much, if not more so, than drug production in recent years. And then in the second article, we take a deep dive into some of the cultural contexts of the movement. So we wanted to try and explain why the movement was driven, as I said, initially by women who'd become exasperated and angry at what they perceived was a worsening situation in which they had to take on caring responsibilities for multiple people, including those with substance use disorders. So this was a clear context of a lack of welfare support and health provision for themselves and for their family members who were affected. And as I mentioned earlier, the burden of managing the broader social implications fell largely upon women who increasingly were acting as heads of household. And this social construct itself is largely a new phenomenon in a Kachin cultural context. And for that reason alone, it also requires our detailed attention. So then in the third article, we try to focus on the complexities of everyday justice in a complex borderland space in northern SHAN state, as you've heard my colleagues across the SHAN and the Kachin regions explaining so clearly and fully. Now, obviously, in this region, there are overlapping domains of administration. So we tried to place the accusation that Pakistan acts beyond the law in a context where, in fact, what constitutes the law in any given environment, the degree to which it can be trusted to deliver justice, and the capacity even to access it is really highly contested. So these articles represent an extended discussion about Pakistan in which we're trying both to deepen and broaden the range of context against which the movement could be understood, and therefore bringing together some of these overarching themes. So if I could have the next slide, please. Now, what we're also trying to think about at the moment is where we go from here. And obviously for all of us, we have long-term commitments to working in Myanmar and trying to support communities to get better outcomes. So within a 4-year period, although it sounds like a long time in the context of a lot of academic research, for us it's really just laying down foundations for things that we can build on. And I think that one thing that we need to embrace and should go further with is to think about, accept and understand the emotional strength that underpinned the emergence of this movement, as well as the response to it, which provoked really strong reactions from so many parties. And we tended to shy away from being so explicit about emotion as a driver in these first articles. So we took a very much a cognitivist approach, as we have throughout the presentations today, really, in that what we were trying to lay out was information, events, experiences, contexts that were rational in that they could make sense of the emergence of the movement and its mode of operation. But I think what you can see here in all of these images, above all else, is that this was a movement that was triggered and gained its social strength and importance from its emotional depth. And I think we really do need to engage with this more and be prepared to be explicit about emotion as an important dimension of local politics. And of course now, with what we see in Myanmar, the ways this extends outwards too, in the current situation, to national politics, if we really want to truly understand what people are experiencing and how passions are so deep in what people are trying to achieve. But obviously the danger for us when engaging with any social movement that expresses, at least in part, the voices of women, is that emotion can very easily become synonymous with irrationality. And there is again a danger when so much of the discourse about Kachinland to date has been about its apparently irrational modes of conduct, especially those that seem not to recognise human rights or the rule of law. So we really can't understand this movement or other social movements without including emotion in our analysis. But we've somehow got to balance this or counteract this tendency to accuse it to stop equating emotion and the irrational. If we dismiss emotion as the opposite of rationality in this context, where there are already significant experiences of discrimination and marginalisation, it can too easily slip into becoming a justification for dismissing the importance of this movement. And this in turn can embed knowledge inequalities in these issues again, with the claims for higher knowledge in the drugs policy frame, or for example in the health and harm reduction fields, assuming a dominance that can appear to be unchallenged. So the irrational populism of Kachinland's activities can provide an excuse not to engage with these actors. Clearly, in this case, emotion led to outcomes that were definitely mistaken, but they shouldn't be dismissed as irrational in the context we describe. And I think it's this that we're really trying to convey in the work that we're doing around this issue. Ultimately, we're not even encouraging an engagement with Kachinland as an organisation, but I think what we're really trying to encourage is a deeper consideration of this emotional response within a deeply traumatised society, that it could have generated this form of movement in the first place. So this issue of intergenerational trauma as well is a very important dimension of understanding what's happening in the Kachin region and also in the SHAN region, as my colleagues from SHAN have just been talking about. And this includes the exacerbating risk factors that lead people to engage in harmful drug use and the wider ramifications of that for individuals and communities. So we have to be serious in how we approach this as an emotional outpouring and consider it how we include it in our analysis. So could you just go forward 2 slides, please, and I'll just conclude. Thank you. So it seems appropriate really to finish with a comment from one of our research participants, who's a woman who'd been involved in the early Kachinland movement. And the statement is very factual, and it strives to explain why the movement was set up, giving a rational, cognitivist material framework again, in which experiences are used to help explain quite specific outcomes. However, even within this quotation, it's apparent that the emotional work that many women in this region feel that they've had to undertake to keep households together, to keep society functioning, to manage poor access to justice, inadequate health care, and above all, the limited recognition of their contributions in these fields that has also resulted in their exclusion from being centre stage in any peace process is also significant. So this kind of emotion work is the kind of issue that we still need to understand more fully, and this involves work beyond this project. The importance of emotion in social movements is broadly understood as being deeply significant. I mean, how can we understand Black Lives Matter or Me Too, for example, without an acceptance of the power of emotion as the precursor for action? So what we're trying to do in these initial articles is just lay some foundations for thinking about these kinds of popular movements in drug-affected societies and what they're trying to tell us in deeper and more profound ways. And as I said, the ways that these actions blend into recent developments with CDM and people's armed movements in Myanmar also starts to become significant now we're seeing things unfold more broadly. And if we're seeking continuity about the wider failings that have occurred in Myanmar. So I'll finish there, but I hope that we make some contribution to these issues, and do please, remain in contact with us if you have any questions or things you'd like to take further. So I'll pass back to you, Pat.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Mandy. And thank you for all the speakers for giving insights into a lot of the research that we've been developing over the last few years. And I think, as Mandy emphasizes there, this is part of a set of long-term partnerships and work that, has predated this project, has continued through this project, and is work that we will continue to work on in the coming years. We've only got a few minutes left for Q&A. I'm sorry, we overran a little bit with the presentations, then getting all the technology set up. There's a couple of questions that have come in from the Q&A on the right-hand side of your screens. And I think, Mandy, you've gone quite a long way to addressing some of these issues in your presentation anyway. I was just wondering whether any of the other speakers, maybe especially starting with you, Dan Seng, whether you had any further reflections in response to the question by Stephen Gray in the chat box, kind of reflecting on why efforts to combat drugs haven't been a higher priority policy agenda in Myanmar, especially from aid donors, and whether you had anything further to kind of reflect on that from all the work that you've been doing around these issues.
I think it's closely linked with the political aspect. I think looking at the 8 agencies in Myanmar, till now I think it's tightly controlled by the government, and so I think you cannot really function without the prior approval from the state. So that's also one of the obstacles for the 8 agencies in order to focus on the attacking the addressing the problem of drug production in Myanmar. So that's one of the reasons. And then the second reason is that I think the overlapping authorities in the ground, because it's extremely difficult to it's extremely difficult for the rule of law to prevail in these politically highly contested areas. Therefore, it's really difficult to address the problem of drug production in Myanmar. I think these are the 2 major obstacles that I can think of. I think that's how I understand his question. If not, then kindly let me know. Thank you.
No, brilliant. I think that was very clear. Thank you, Dan Seng. There's also another question that's just come in from you. And I'll just read it out now because it might be easier if people don't have the questions to hand. And the question is, with the evolving armed actors after the February 21st coup, there are concerns that these newly emerged armed groups may commit environmental crimes, for example, illegal logging and other forms of illicit economies, as their resources are scarce to deploy an attack strategy against the military junta. What are the potential pathways so that we will not repeat the same history? That's a very challenging question. I think that maybe I might offer a slight reflection that links with a lot of what Dan Seng Long was presenting today around drug issues. In relation to kind of the Konka militia and the case study that he was presenting there was an inherent tension that came out of our research and a lot of the work that KRC did looking at this particular militia around their relationship with the drug trade and with other illicit economies. That on the one hand, it was almost a kind of necessity for the organization to develop a strong enough base of financing and resources to try to pursue a set of political agendas in that region, which was often about trying to kind of resist pressures from the Myanmar military and from other armed organizations. And that led into the organization's quite close relationship with the illegal drug trade and with the money that was being generated from that. But at the same time, the organization was very aware of the growing concerns around drug issues in these contexts, reflecting very much what Mandy presented in her talk about the growing societal concerns. So you had the same militias, and Konka is by no means the only one, that was heavily involved in drug issues, also trying to play a role in policing drug issues, providing some rudimentary treatment services, trying to attract kind of NGOs into their areas to work on a whole array of different social issues. So you see some of the inherent tensions and contradictions within these contexts of protracted conflict and overlapping authorities, where you have the same organizations inadvertently become complicit in many of these issues, whether in your question that relates to sort of environmental damage from kind of resource extraction, at the same time as they're also trying to manage and respond to societal concerns around these issues. And I don't know if others have anything else they want to add. We've only got a couple of minutes there. If anybody does want to come in, just unmute yourselves and jump in.
Yeah, sorry about addressing the questions of you. I think what do you mean by newly emerged armed groups? Do you mean the People Defense Forces? That's I think because ethnic armed groups, I think they are not newly emerged armed groups. They have been, there since the independence of the country. So if you talk about the People Defense Forces and things like that, I think the situation is still not very clear. Currently, what they are trying to do is that I think they're trying to create the control areas, control territories for the National Unity Government, the kind of parallel government against the current SAC government in Myanmar. Especially it's taking place in the Kachinland region. So I think it's very unsure yet, whether they will go for the same pathway like the ceasefire period, when you see a lot of environmental destructions, But currently, I think in order to arm themselves and things like that, raise the troops and things like that, so they started collecting, taxes and things like that from the gold mining and the other trade activities, but has not really gone into the logging and things like that. But yeah, so it wasn't really clear which newly emerged armed groups you're addressing about. So that's my response.
Brilliant, thank you. I've just had the message from Jay saying that I think we need to wrap up here. There's a couple of questions that we haven't got to answer, but we will take notes on these and we'll try and get back to you. I'll just flag them up here. There was one question about reflections on the UNODC's drug eradication mechanisms in these areas. And I think I would sort of point you towards the special issue of the International Journal of Drug Policy, which Mandy mentioned in relation to the 3 SHAN papers, because there's also quite a lot of reflections around drug eradication efforts in Myanmar, but also across the other countries in Afghanistan and Colombia, and issues around alternative development that reflect on this issue. There's also a question from Siu Hang Tam around the perspectives of other EAOs in response to the drug issues, acknowledging that some groups like the KIA and UWSA have openly denounced drug use, but questions about other major EAOs within the region. And then there was a final question also from Bayard Roberts, which was a particular question directed towards Mandy and her presentation, asking about the extent to which respondents in the research reflected on mental health needs, and if so, how were these expressed? And I'm sorry, I think we've run out of time here, Mandy, to get back at this now. I would just emphasize that in the report that we've just released on the Voices from the Borderlands report, it's framed around a number of different life stories, and the particular life story around a lady in Kachin state, I think, tells a really fascinating and very difficult story around a life that has been affected by violence and by drug issues. And I think, although it's not necessarily framed around this language of mental health, I think that provides some really fascinating kind of and challenging insights into some of these issues. So that may be a useful starting point, and I'm sure we'll get back to you on that question as well, Bayard. So I think we'll finish off now. There's a 10 to 15 minute break, and then there's the option to again choose a country session to go into. And in the Myanmar session, we're going to be returning to some of these issues, but with a particular focus on the border town of Muse, which has become a key border town on the Myanmar-China border. And we're going to look at sort of a biography of this particular town and reflecting on how drugs have become embedded within wider issues around development, conflict within this particular space. But I'll finish here, and again, a huge thank you to all of our presenters, especially for managing all the kind of technical issues as well through that. So we'll finish off here, and hopefully we'll see many of you after the break in the second Myanmar session. Thank you.